My name is Mary D. Rhodes. I am the Director of Research here in the Business School and also the co-director of the Center for Social Innovation. And I wouldn't normally be opening these, but it is a special day because we are also announcing the establishment of our third Center of Expertise here in the school, the new Corporate Governance Lab, which will be run as the director. Daniel Mallon will be running this going forward. And it is a real development that we feel launches our new strategy for Business for Good, which we launched last year and are now building on success after success. And this is the latest one. So I am absolutely delighted to be here today, not just to welcome our wonderful guests, but also to announce the establishment of that center. I think it is my duty to welcome our guests. Is that true? And then hand over to Daniel. So I would like to welcome Dr. Klaus Moosmayer from Novartis and his colleagues. He's come with a team, Neve McDonald and Joanne Sadelsky. I hope I didn't murder those names too much, which is great to have a team from Novartis. I won't spend too much time talking about them because I know that's Daniel. He's going to do that. And we are delighted to have this kind of high-level discussion around innovations that we hope to see more of over the years on this topic of ethics, risk and compliance, and crowdsourcing a code of ethics. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Daniel Mallon. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Mary Lee. Did you take my notes or not? No, they're in my pockets. Thank you so much for the introduction, Mary Lee, and indeed it's a great honor. First of all, for me to welcome our guests, but also a really exciting day, to announce the launch of the Corporate Governance Lab, and over the next couple of weeks and months, more information about the activities will be presented to you and on the website. One of the great opportunities that we have was to take over the Business Ethics Speaker Series event, which was sort of initiated in the Center for Social Innovation, of which Mary Lee is co-director. And as part of the spin-out process of now having the Corporate Governance Lab, we delighted with my colleagues Kenneth Silver and Max Schromeyer, fortunately cannot be here, to give it a new lease on life, and then also to complement it with many other activities as we move forward. I was about to apologize for the absence of our dean, who was sort of caught up in employment matters. Andrew, I think perhaps before I introduce the speakers, I'll ask you also then to say a few words now, when we were on sort of standby, because we knew you were in that panel, we could ask you perhaps to say a few words at the end. Which would you prefer? Maybe at the end. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, let's get straight into business then. Absolutely delighted to welcome Klaus Moosmayer, the Chief Ethics, Risk and Compliance Officer at Novartis since 2018. His colleagues, Neve McDonald, who's the Global Director of Capability Development in the Ethics, Risk and Compliance function, and Joanne Sadelsky, Head of Ethics, Risk and Compliance for the UK and Ireland. Welcome to all of you. So nice to have a whole Novartis delegation here. They'll have the benefit of seeing probably one of the last times before the Book of Kells disappears from the old library and the last books disappear from the shelves for a while, but we're going to go there later this afternoon. Welcome to Trinity campus. It's wonderful to have you here. I've known Klaus for a couple of years now. We had the opportunity to work together as co-chairs of the B20 Task Force on Integrity and Compliance last year, and also a few years ago. Before that, Klaus was also chair of the Ethics and Integrity Task Force when Germany was at the presidency of the B20. Before Novartis, he was with Siemens as the Chief Compliance Officer for a number of years, and also through the World Economic Forum's PACI project, we've had the opportunity to work together. I taught an undergraduate course on research methods and case study writing this morning, and I told them that we're in the process of also writing a case study about Novartis. which is going to unfold over the next couple of months on this very topic. And I'm delighted to introduce Klaus, who'll be talking about crowdsourcing a code of ethics. I should welcome our online audience as well. And as I mentioned in the chat, please use the Q&A function to post your questions, and we'll have time for Q&A at the end. But without further ado, Klaus, over to you. Welcome.
Fantastic. Hello, everyone. How are you? All good? Yeah, good spirit in the room, hopefully, and also online. Thank you, Daniel, for the nice introduction, Emily, as well, of course, and the Dean. It's a big honor to be at Trinity to discuss how a big company, is trying, again, no one is perfect, to do something new in ethics by crowdsourcing a code of ethics. And we go into the details also with Neve and Joanne. But I think before we go into this, that's not a marketing show, shouldn't be. A little bit about Novartis and the environment where we are as a pharmaceutical company. Because if you do a code of ethics project, and code of ethics are existing in the public area, in universities, governmental agencies, in the private business and NGOs, you have to fully understand the ecosystem you are. And I'm not a behavioral scientist, I'm a lawyer by background, but many years ago, but I learned a lot from our behavioral scientists we have at Novartis, or in our function as well, that the context you are in is super relevant for the effect, the impact you have on an organization. You have to understand for whom and with whom you are writing this. So, moving slide.
It is. We can, perhaps you can just bring that a little bit closer. Can you also turn up the volume on this, and let me just.
No, it should work.
There we go.
Yeah. So, hopefully. As high as I can. Okay, can you hear me online as well? Good. Okay. So about the company, and again, I mean, the pharmaceutical company is definitely one of the most scrutinized industries globally for good reasons. I mean, there is hardly another industry which is as close to human life and health as you can imagine. And there's a lot of questions about our industry. And the reputation was, at least prior to the pandemic, and a record low, has improved over the last couple of years, maybe more due to trust in science and in industry. What I want to show you here is that in the center, what a company is doing is research and development. So we are spending 9 billion every year in research and development, and we have more than 30,000 scientists working in the company. Develop a drug takes 10 to 15 years, and hardly any of these research drugs get onto the market. So we have a huge difference between more or less 10,000 diseases we know globally, and roughly 2,000 drugs we have on the market to treat diseases. So you see, it's a huge scientific undertaking, and full, of course, of ethical dilemmas. I mean, the code of ethics needs to fit to what you call the culture of a company. And when our new CEO, Vasner Simon, took over just before I arrived at Novartis, his big objective was to change the culture as well. That's now easier said than done. Cultural changes take years, if not decades. Novartis was always admired as a first-class scientific organization, but was seen as a very hierarchical, stiff, performance-oriented company. And what we tried to do in the last years was, despite all the challenges, and we are a for-profit organization, this will not change, and the profit we generate, we need to fund research and development. We try to do the right things. And you see here also the main topic, the inspiration you want to create, the curiosity about learning, the unbossed, which is a different management style we try to get into the organization, a high support, also challenging, but a servant leadership as well. All may sound like buzzwords for you. It's a lot of training, getting feedback as a leader as well. And of course, integrity. It's a global company. It's a huge company, more than 100,000 people around the globe. Fantastic from the diversity point of view. We are coming close to 50% of women in management positions as well, which changes definitely the culture of a company as well. We are very broad, or active in most of the relevant therapeutic areas, cardiovascular and cancer, and so on and so forth. And we are, which again brings ethical dilemmas with it. We are pioneer in very new areas like cell and gene therapy, which potentially is the future of medicine, because you can really heal a genetic disease, which is deadly normally. It has a lot of ethical questions around as well. A huge expectation by society, but high cost, difficult access topics. So also a big reason why we got into the code of ethics journeys a couple of years. About ethics, risk, and compliance, I don't want to get too much into this. I just want to make one thing clear. I mean, you may have heard from compliance departments, policing, more style in organizations. So what we want to achieve is the following. It starts with the ethical topics, and we're not owning ethics at Novartis as a function. We try to be the catalyst for ethical dilemmas and discussions in the organization and beyond, with stakeholders like at the World Economic Forum, at the B20, the OECD, where we are active. So it's about a kind of sharing and getting dilemmas on the table. Solutions are difficult, but transparency in discussion helps already. We cover the whole risk management and crisis management in the company. So a lot of my time is at the moment, of course, focused on the situation in Ukraine and Russia, Turkey, the earthquake, the pandemic was managed also out of my organization. Because the risk gives you a huge insight into what really is pain and hurts an organization, also opportunities. I mean, if you go deep into risk management, you learn a lot about psychological safety, bravery to speak up, getting elephants on the room. So we believe the risk management is a crucial part of a holistic assurance function. And of course, the classical healthcare compliance. We are fully regulated industry. Everything is regulated what we do. And also here, the code of ethics is super relevant because you don't win over people with paper. As Michael Jordan once said, paper don't play, right? I mean, it's not something which really great enthusiasm around an organization or is impactful. There has to be something different. I give you one anecdote also why we started the code of ethics crowdsourcing journey. When I started in the company, I had to sign a contract, and this was a couple of months before I started in 2018. And I read, of course, everything about Novartis, and I read the code of conduct, as it was called back then, 2018. When I signed my contract, of course, the code of conduct was attached. When I opened the code of conduct, I looked at the face of the previous CEO, Joe Jimenez, not the actual CEO, Vasner Simmons, hired me. I asked the head of HR, hey, Stephen, why do I have to sign the old code of conduct, the old picture? Yeah, look, it's too expensive to print out all the new code. And so we just took the old version. I said, okay, seems to be that the code is something regulatorily important, but not something which is really bright or which really inspires the people in the organization. What we learn, I mean, from behavioral science is also that we have, of course, trust, and competence is super relevant to create trust for a company. Competence in the scientific value and strengths of an organization. But ethics is super relevant. I mean, and you all know this, if you have this perceived scandals about an organization, public or private, this marks your image about the reputation of an organization, makes your decision as the next generation, if you want to join this organization, if you want to work for this organization, yes or no. So this topic of ethics is super relevant and can be easily lost. I mean, in social media world, I mean, one topic in one country can easily erode the trust, which is a big challenge for big organizations as well. So when we said we need a new code of ethics to foster this cultural journey we want to have at Novartis, to a more servant leadership, to be an inclusive leadership, not forget getting performance, but also offering support. We said, let's do the following. It's behavioral science. We need to understand the context of the people. You only get attention if you understand where the people are working, what are their daily challenges are. The co-creation. So how do we get people on board to basically are not only on the receiving end of the code of ethics. It has to be meaningful. In the ideal world, it's our code of ethics, something which really we did together. And then alignment, because if the code of ethics is it's just an island in the company, it's not aligned with all the function, all the policies, there is no way of success. In ethics, I mean, you may have seen this in other lectures. It's this classical iceberg scenario. So you have the visible part of the ethical iceberg you can address with the rules and regulations, and training and controls, which you need in big organization as well. But the biases, which you all have, I come to biases also in the course of this lecture, they are under the water. You don't see them. The people rarely put them on the table because it's about vulnerability, about showing up to be vulnerable. And this is not what companies are normally good in that. When I started my career in a company many years ago, the first speech of my boss in the town hall was, we are so important, we can't afford to make mistakes. That's a little bit shapes you also in your personal development. So we also said, if you go for a new code of ethics, if you go for crowdsourcing, this can't be only a document, a paper at the end of the day. There has to be an ecosystem around this, which makes it sustainable and long lasting. So we said we need a code of ethics. We need a framework which helps the people not to come to an answer in a dilemma, but to get support in an ethical dilemma. And we need also resources to do this. And maybe before I go into the code and the product, Neve, because you've been instrumental to talk about the way how we did the crowdsourcing with the associates at the beginning of this journey. So Neve, please.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Yep.
I think okay, it's on now. So good afternoon, and I'll just say a word or two about the crowdsourcing effort. I think just to pick up on one really important thing that Klaus said, it's no good just ERC owning this topic. This is something that all associates needed to feel that they could buy into as well. So we ran 2 or 3 different phases of crowdsourcing. The first one was relating to the topics that we included in the Code of Ethics. So we had the existing Code of Conduct, which Klaus mentioned. We had a materiality assessment that had been put together by the Corporate Social Responsibility team at that time. And we used a tool called Imaginatic, where we uploaded kind of a list of suggested topics that we might include in the new code. And we used that tool then to ask people for their perspective on what we had suggested. They could also suggest other topics that we hadn't included on that list, and then they could kind of vote or comment, and we collected feedback based on that. So we reviewed it, and the result of that is what you actually see in the Code of Ethics, or the final version. The second phase was then where we invited people to participate in what is essentially a design thinking process. So we had a load of volunteers from all different functions who signed up on a list, and then they participated in crafting and refining like language that went into the code. They helped us to create this ecosystem that Klaus mentioned. So that's the Code of Ethics platform, including this decision-making framework. We have a toolkit that helps people to then take the results of that decision-making framework and to talk about it with their teams, because it's no good identifying that you have a problem. You have to do something about it and feel comfortable with your teams to take those actions. So that was another phase, and then we ramped up thereafter. So we had many thousands of associates participating, and there are also many associates who work in sites around the world who don't have access to some of the technologies that we used. And we leveraged our compliance officers in those markets or those sites to collect the feedback as well. So.
Yeah. And as Neve said, thousands of associates joined us in this journey, and we launched this in the pandemic. You know, I mean, this was in 2019, 2020 then, which was at the end also a little bit an advantage because people got used to enter user communities to participate. So there was a higher knowledge of how to participate on these digital platforms to give votes and to wordsmith on our commitment. So, and one thing just is maybe a small topic, but when you go to our code of ethics, and you can access it also externally in the Novartis homepage easily, the faces you see, these are real associates. These were all people who participated in the crowdsourcing as well. We got the consent, of course, from them, but they're very proud to do it. So we said, this was a discussion with the associates, as Neve said, around the globe, thousands of associates. We need first of all basic principles, and then these principles lead to commitments. And these were the principles which were the ones which came out of the crowdsourcing: be open-minded, be honest, be bold, be accountable. And also these questions which are underlying in our code of ethics, these are questions which we discussed and wordsmithed with all of the associates, the employees around the globe in these user towns. And it was an interesting process, and topics which then came up afterwards. What are the most relevant topic for our company? And you see, of course, classical topics like anti-bribery or third-party risk management, but health and safety, human rights. We just discussed this at the beginning of the conference. Human rights was super relevant for the people. People resonate, especially, I would say, in the pandemic, very much to fair employment practices. So diversity and inclusion, big voting to get us into the code of ethics as well. So these were the topics which were then all selected in the crowdsourcing and discussed with the associates. And then to make this tangible, this is one example now on the human rights. We said we want to have a clear commitment statement, and then a question why it matters. And then this is the alignment part. If you remember this, the digital version of the code is then linked to the whole policy landscape we have in the company. So you can then immediately, if you go to the digital version from the code of ethics and human rights, switch from the commitment, from the explanation to our human rights, broader, bigger commitments and policies we have available for the associates. So we connected basically the code as the constitution for the company with all of the relevant policies and guidelines, just to make it also easier and simpler for the associates to have a one-stop shop to find the relevant policies in the company. The decision explorer. I mean, we see the people in the dilemmas, and they are often alone. So we said, let's offer them the possibilities on a digital platform to mirror their ethical dilemmas they have in a questionnaire. And it's based on artificial intelligence, right? We'll not get an answer, but you will get a feedback, and I come to this, where we believe the issues could be. And just to give you a number, we're tracking also the users on this platform. And we had, Neve, right, more than 150,000 users already on the Code of Ethics platform since the launch. And I think this is an incredibly high number for a company where the people are normally overburdened by information which they daily receive. And the feedback they receive is basically the bias. So my bias, when I do this quite frequently, when I enter my questions and mirror myself, is overconfidence or group thinking fallacy, because these are topics which limit us in our ethical decision making. So the tool basically gives you ideas to read and to discuss, and it also gives you the possibility to connect you directly with colleagues from the ethic, risk, and compliance organization if you need a real human being to discuss your ethical dilemmas as well. So this is the idea, coming back to the iceberg, how we wanted to address the visible part and the invisible part with the tool and with the code. What we also learned is that it's super relevant to get the people a safe space to admit mistakes and to speak up. So the creating of a safe space by this platform, linking this to the ethics, risk, and compliance organization was absolutely crucial for us. And we wanted to make this also very visible in the organization. So when we concluded the work, the crowdsourcing on the code of ethics, we said, this needs to be a really big bang in the organization. So we did a global launch of the code of ethics in all the countries around the world, and of the platform. And maybe, Jan, you just give your view how this went in Ireland and in the UK.
I'm happy to do so. And I guess if you had noticed on the slides, it doesn't say the code of ethics, it says our code of ethics. It was really important. I think language makes a difference. It was incumbent on the countries of us associates on the ground to make sure that to understand it was built for us, but by us. So what did that mean for us at the country level? We needed to really understand what that meant. So the first thing I would say is creating that, as Klaus said, that space for psychological safety, for people to ask the questions, to feel comfortable to say, wait a second, I'm having an ethical dilemma. Equally, it's also important for the countries, for the associates to understand what is an ethical dilemma. I think in our industry, there's an understanding that an ethical dilemma is a big issue. I have a drug safety issue. I have, a risk of it being perceived as undue influence or bribery, that someone's offering me an envelope of cash to do something. But ethical dilemmas come in all shapes and sizes. So really making sure that associates understood what that looked like. So I think those are two of the big principles that I would say were really important for us at the country level to really make sure that this could come to life, to have those open discussions so that we could come to the best solutions possible.
So maybe on closing a little bit, the big question is, how do you keep such a beautiful product live? Because companies are normally good in launching new processes and projects, and this was much more than a project. But how can you keep this live and relevant for the associates, for the employees around the world? So pharma industry is data-driven industry for sure. So we heavily use data for risk management, but also for our code of ethics journey. So what we did now 2 years in a row, and this will be the third year this year, later this year, we do a global ethics survey. And the idea is not mandatory, can't do this, but ask each and every associate to participate and also get the management behind to promote this ethical baseline survey. So normally if you do surveys in companies, you get a response rate, if it's not mandatory, of 10, 15% max of an organization. This is seen as statistically relevant already. So you see here, this was a huge survey. So we had more than 60 questions in the survey. And I said, my God, no one will answer this. This is totally out of the reach. But we had in both of the years, we had far more than 30,000 fully completed answers. So it is statistically a super rich data we have in the company to know where the state of mind on ethics is. And this is in addition to the quarterly pulse check we do anyway, our voice at Novartis, which also has 1-2 ethical questions in there. But this is really full-blown on ethics. And then again, you have to make this relevant for the people that something happens afterwards. So when we did these surveys, we created roundtables and discussions in the countries based on the survey outcome. We linked this back to the code of ethics and the ethical dilemmas. What is the issue? And one topic which came out, and this may be in many big organizations, there is still a big fear of retaliation if you really put the elephant in the room, if you speak up. This was one of the drivers. So one of the practical products and consequences of the ethical baseline service we did was a new anti-retaliation policy, which we launched only recently, to give the people the comfort what the company can do to enable an open speak up culture. Super difficult. It's not easy going, but this is a relevant issue. And we are going beyond this. So another topic which we saw is when you get people into a company, you train them on the code of ethics. So we have an annual training on the code of ethics, and we have the platform, and we track the visits. We keep this updated. We have a toolkit which the managers are using to create a safe space if they open up a meeting. But we said, can we do more before the people are joining us? So what we at the moment are doing is we are trying to get ethical questions into the recruitment process, the hiring process, which is super interesting because if you apply for a job, you expect the question about your professional capabilities. What have you done? How long have you been there? What examinations you have done? The grade. And so we nudge in ethical questions in the recruitment process. Again, not perfect. You have to convince the HR organization to do this, to support this. But it's super interesting to get the step before people are joining the company. Because if they are aware that the company, in all its imperfection we have as corporations, has a focus on ethical behavior as part of the hiring process, so we call it hiring for integrity. It's an important topic. So before coming into the Q&A, so again, don't want to do a marketing show here. You heard from the colleagues, it's a topic which is relevant for the company. It's closely linked to the culture, and this is definitely still on a journey, not perfect, but we are very satisfied with the feedback, with how the people use the code of ethics, how they use the platforms. Continuously think how to keep this on live, because it's basically the foundation for all what we try to do for ethics, risk, and compliance in the company. So I pause here, and then Daniel, we go over for Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Klaus. And let's immediately open the floor for Q&A. I will monitor the Zoom account in a moment, but let's go to the room first. If I could ask you, if you have a question, please raise your hand, introduce yourself, and make a comment or ask a question. Who'd like to go first? I see a hand going up here. Kenneth.
Thanks, Daniel. So yeah, I'm Kenneth, assistant professor here, thinking about business ethics. I just wanted to invite you to talk more about how the tool gets used. So the decision, what's it called? The ethical decision tool. I mean, I think it's really commendable, the crowdsourcing initiative. I think it's really nice, given that firms dominate their employees. It's really good that you kind of did this, I assume, as a means to get buy-in. I think it's like wonderfully democratic. But yeah, I just wanted to hear more about how the tool actually gets used in practice.
Yeah, shall I stand? Okay. So thank you for the question. The Decision Explorer is an integral part of the suite of products that we've put together. And we've ensured that that's linked very much with training. So for example, when we launched the Code of Ethics, we had a global e-training, and we have a global e-training every year on the Code of Ethics. So we have found ways of ensuring that that's linked into it. So in the first training, people were made aware that it existed. They simulated like certain aspects of it. And then that was cascaded, obviously, down through the organization. And we try to plug it into various different initiatives that we run. So if there is any, ethical topics associated with a certain thing, we would put a link to the Decision Explorer in that communication. We would ask managers to reinforce it. We've linked it into various different management trainings that we have as well. We have an internal program called M1. We stress that within it as well. So we try to communicate it at various different levels within the organization.
I mean, the decision framework is super intuitive. So there's a set of questions. You have your ethical dilemma in the mind, and then you go through and you answer accordingly. At the end, you get the kind of feedback. Well, we believe the bias could be there. You could read this. You could get advice here. And I give you a very actual example that this can be applied to very actual topic. I mean, I think especially for a university, it's but also for us as a science-based company, I mean, ChatGPT and other platforms which will come, it's only the start potentially, has risks and opportunities, right? So we just did a major awareness campaign last week, if I'm not mistaken. Was this week or last week? This week already? This week, where we said, look, ChatGPT is an opportunity. It's also a risk we have to be aware of from a question: how reliable is the data you get out there? What data you should put in there, but should not put in there, which is a company secrets, for example, or confidential, or from a data privacy and a few personal data. And then, as Neve said, in this campaign, we said, we recommend you to go back to the code of ethics and the platform and just do the test with you before you go to ChatGPT and see where you are. And 2 years ago, we had a major exercise based on one of the commitments that we commit to the responsible use of artificial intelligence. We did a kind of position paper on principles of responsible use of artificial intelligence, so transparency, responsibility of the people, human factor in there. And we linked this with the code of ethics to this ChatGPT awareness campaign. So as Neve said, we try to, whenever something comes up, we try to link this there together to actual topics. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Rachel Clark. I was with a competitor of yours for many years doing similar work. And I just have to say I'm blown away by the innovation of the program and what you've done from end to end. It's really smart, and it's very difficult to do that in a really huge audience or a huge company. Tell me about line managers, you know, when you're looking at your ethics survey, because obviously they're going to, you know, oversee the ethical climate, be very much a force in it. Are you seeing data back with your line managers, or did you give them special support to try and help them navigate this with their employees?
It's a super good call out. I mean, if you look where ethics or compliance or risk systems are failing, I mean, if you don't have the commitment from the top management, you're anyway lost. I mean, it should not start even. This is dangerous. But the line manager, so the first contact for a new employee, the one who is visible on the front, this is the most important person, right? And not easy to reach them. So what we've said, the M1 program, for example, that's especially a program designed for people who have colleagues who have the first responsibility as people leaders, because that's a big task. I mean, if you step up to be the first time in your life a manager, managing people, leading people, this is super relevant. When we got out the readout of the ethical baseline surveys, this was mostly relevant for the relationship between the line managers and their associates, because the line managers, we found out they are basically much more overconfident that everything is well and nice and ethical. Members of their teams are not that much. It's quite interesting topic. So we tried to nudge into the country workshops we did to say, look, would be good if the line managers and the associates discuss this topic, so that the toolkit comes into play. Toolkit, I think we had 50,000, around a little bit less, 45,000 use of the toolkits. Toolkit, which you put on a platform, are exactly case studies, dilemmas for line managers, head of sales, head of procurement, to 5 minute open up icebreaker of a normal business meeting. Because what normally companies are doing, you come together, a sales meeting, procurement meeting, a research meeting, and you jump into the business directly. Difficult to bring up the elephant in the room or your personal concerns in such a meeting, because the atmosphere is set. It's all about business. So what we find super helpful is, and we do this in the executive committee of Novartis with our CEO, we do this every time when we meet. We first have an icebreaker. We first go around the room and say, everyone tells a personal story which was relevant, difficult the last couple of weeks for us. And then sometimes people up, it's a family story, a personal story, it's a business story. And this cool toolkit helps the line managers to do this, to open up 5 minutes, an ethical dilemma. What is the view on this? Or try to open up the room for a personal story. I think this is the way how beyond the classical training and controls, what we can do to help them. I don't know if the colleagues have any more views on this, Jan, from your side or whatever.
What I would just add to that is very much the discussions, as Klaus said, with the line managers to bring that awareness. So at a country level, we did those workshops to really bring forth, as I mentioned earlier, that psychological safety, but equally what is an ethical dilemma and that comfort to have that discussion. And that is a journey because everyone likes to think everything's rosy and I don't have any dilemmas and I just make decisions, but decisions have an ethical consequence sometimes. So I think those discussions, and it was really, I think, enlightening at the country level for people to have those discussions because everyone walked in thinking, oh, this is just another corporate engagement thing and we need to talk about our feelings or whatever. But at the end, everyone walked away in the several that I attended in my country to just sort of say, wait a second, I've learned something that it's okay to have a discussion. I didn't realize I was having these, ethical dilemmas, but equally bringing those examples forward. The next step for us was to get those people to come forward in broader sort of town halls to say, here's where I was. And it's not about the right answer or the wrong answer. It's what's the journey and what's the thinking that I went through to assess that. And what are the biases that I was, unconscious to. So that was an important part of the journey as well.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm Sinead Roden. I am in supply chain and I run the Masters in Operations and Supply Chain, and delighted to see some of the class here today. So yeah, I'm obviously going to come at it then from a slightly different angle. And that of, I guess, external to the business itself and thinking about engagement with some of the key stakeholders within your supply chain when, let's face it, a lot of the breaches in moral codes and ethics and expectations happen with those first, second, third tier suppliers. And I was just wondering, was there any engagement with the supply chain, or is that a separate conversation, or just where you sit with on that?
Well, yeah, that's a super good question. So we try to transfer the principles of the Code of Ethics in our third-party code. Let's start with the policy level, and we then talk about the real life in a second. So we are quite transparent there. So we have an own external presence on third-party risk management and supply chain and human rights and the third-party code. So the third-party code very much tries to resonate to the principles of the Code of Ethics as well. It also very practically opens up the possibility as a grievance mechanism to raise concerns from a supply chain. I mean, as an expert, supply chain is super complex. I mean, the first tier supplier, yeah, you have a legal relationship. You can audit. We just had this morning in Dublin the meeting with the associates here, also the one colleague who sits here in Dublin, our Novartis corporate center, who is responsible as a leader for the anti-bribery third-party audits we do. So we do then also audits and look, but we do more. We offer training for the suppliers as well. We also offer them, in case they don't have a good compliance system in place, support, how, not that we take over accountability, but how we can help them, because we believe there is a learning curve for many third parties and suppliers, and you have to have an open door to show, look, even if you're not perfect, we are willing to go into a remediation cycle with you and to help you. And two very practical examples. So when COVID hit, I mean, we prepared a toolbox for our supplier to keep their associates safe again, also because we had own learnings that, look, it's a toolbox, very pragmatic safety measures you can apply in your companies. We also, and that's a difficult topic in some countries, we're doing the same on diversity and inclusion, how to treat next to the legal topic that we say we expect from our supplier to pay minimum wages, but also on diversity and inclusion. Now with the environmental targets, without the suppliers, we will never reach our environmental targets, because 90% of our emissions are emissions from our suppliers. We have 10% only in our own manufacturing. So it's a dialogue which needs to be even strengthened. And one good thing what I saw is we have formed in the pharma industry the Pharmaceutical Supply Chain Initiative after a big scandal in India. So the Musi River Delta was completely polluted by suppliers of the pharma industry. It was a big outcry. Nodia did a big report on this. As a consequence, we formed this Pharmaceutical Supply Chain Initiative to come to joint standards and a dialogue with suppliers. And now we have a specific project in the Musi River area to try to help the suppliers to live up to the values we all expect. But it's a long journey, to be honest. I mean, we have 10,000s of supplier and third parties, but this is a little bit the approach we have there.
We have time for one final question. Marilee.
So thanks very much. That was fascinating and really well evidenced in terms of how you went about it. I'm just wondering, was there anything you tried that stands out that really didn't work in this journey? Because I think one of the things we really try to do is learn from other people's mistakes.
No, definitely. It was definitely a learning journey. I mean, the first approach maybe just to engage the people outside digital channels didn't work out very well, because you are very limited who you can reach. So learning was we need to use digital channels and platforms to get a broader audience in. Then also we said we have to learn that this is a developing lively topic. It's not set in stone. So we learned that we need to adapt the code over time. So we added a new commitment recently, also in patient engagement, for example. So this idea, well, it is done and now it's written in stone. It's an additional learning we have. Being a lawyer myself, a learning as was a lawyer once, as much as we need good legal advice on the code as well, and it also needs to fulfill the expectations of the authorities, keep the lawyers a little bit away from drafting code language. I mean, this has to be, maybe I need to say a couple of words. The language has to be as clear and easy understandable as you can, not especially a topic lawyers do well. And there we made our learnings, and to come to a halfway easy to understand antitrust commitment and explanation is not that easy. So if anything else we missed and we learned over time.
I think you've covered quite well, Klaus. What we missed, there were protracted discussions about drafting with the legal guys, but we made it in the end and very deliberately used layman's language and called out the commitment and why it matters. So that was really important. But I think just one thing that worked, I think, well, that's worth calling out is the collaboration we had with other functions. So instead of just driving this from the ethics team, we collaborated with the HR department and communications. And that was fundamentally important. I think we were at a particular point in time within the organization with curious, inspired, and unbossed culture that Klaus referenced. And it was really powerful to bring together that culture and then the value of integrity, and for all of those functions to see it work together. So I would, you mentioned earlier about the work that you're trying to do and to get traction. I think bringing as many stakeholders on board as you can, who can see the value for themselves in that project, will help you to drive that forward as well.
I mean, again, this should not be a marketing show, Daniel. It should be an honest dialogue. maybe the last advice, it's easier said than done, because at Novartis we have the ability, if you go on this journey, it has to be a top issue for the company. If not, it will just get lost in the ocean of communication and other stuff. I mean, the benefit we have is that I'm sitting at the executive committee. We can drive this, we can get the budget, the impact, but it's if it's seen as just an issue of the compliance guys, it will be a nice paper at the end, but not really impactful. Yeah, thank you, and thank you for all the questions.
Thank you very much, Klaus. Before I ask the Dean just to say a formal word of thanks and closing, and hand over a very small token of appreciation to all three of you, let me just say a couple of things from my side is that I think this is really a fascinating case study to look at. If we look at the field of ethics and organizational integrity as this crossover between academic work and practitioner work, a couple of trends that certainly come up all the time would be, I think, the things that you've mentioned. There's the need for this to be a strategic issue, to be driven from the top, the need to move beyond compliance to a more holistic approach to integrity, to look at behavioral issues, to use technology, to engage in collective action, to reach out to others in the industry. And I think on all of those things, you've managed to take the lead, while at the same time remaining sort of modest and saying that, you know, you don't have all the answers, you're learning, you're making mistakes, and you're going through that. So from my side, thank you so much for that. And I will now ask our Dean just to say a couple of words in closing. Thank you.